Hello you wonderful people of booktube, and welcome back to a video. I know it's been a long time since I've done a long form video, so say hello Buster. Go back to sleep, good boy. Long form video. So today I want to talk to you about my 2025 wrap up. So at the beginning of the year I set 14 goals. So in this video I want to see whether I met these goals and talk to you through them. Anyway, so I'm going to give you a few figures. So this year I read 49 books. Now the average rating I gave these books were 3.9 stars out of 5. The most genre I read, which I'm quite surprised about, is fantasy. So this year's been for me more about fantasy rather than historical fiction. The most authors I read, and these both together with 5 books I believe it was, is J.K. Rowling and Suzanne Collins. I did go down a rabbit hole with the Hunger Games this year, but I'll talk to you more about that later. So let's kick in and see whether I actually completed the 14 goals that I set at the beginning of 2025. So my first reading goal was to reread the Harry Potter series. So I actually read the Philosopher's Stone at the end of 2024, and I can say that this year I actually completed the rest of them, and I loved going back. It must have been about 15 years since I last read the Harry Potter books. I think I will do a video on the Harry Potter books at some point this year about how I felt about them. But what surprised me the most was how different actually the books were from the films. Obviously I've seen the films many a time over the last 15 years, but yeah, I absolutely loved rereading the Harry Potter books, and it was just, you know, it brought back memories of my childhoods. Goal number 2 was to read a duology, and the duology I chose was actually Kings of Scars and Rules of Wolves. Because I had read Six of Crows, but I wanted to reread Six of Crows and the second book before I read these 2 books, and I did not read any of them. So yeah, that is something that I was a little bit disappointed in myself with, but I do really still want to read these books. I'm desperate to reread the Six of Crows and then actually read the second book in that duology. I just didn't get around to it. So my third goal was to read a trilogy, and the trilogy that I chose was the Century Trilogy by Ken Follett, and oh my god, I'm so glad that I chose that trilogy. I absolutely loved all 3 books. It was right up my street. So it's basically books that start from just before the First World War is the first book, and the third book finishes more or less at the downfall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. It follows 5 families through the events of the 21st century. Altogether these books were about 3,010 pages, so I didn't read them one after the other. That would have been a bit too intimidating for me, so I did manage to read them. I thought Fall of Giants was by far the best. I enjoyed it so much, which I was surprised because I usually tend to enjoy Second World War more than First World War, which, you know, the Second World War was the second book. I love how it flipped. The first book, which was called Fall of Giants, flips between the rich and the poor. We're basically looking at the First World War, women's rights, the Russian Revolution, a love story between an English woman and a German soldier through the First World War, and just about the politics, all about the First World War and the Russian Revolution. And in there as well, it also was talking about the strikes of the coal mines. So it started off, really that's where it started off, at the beginning of the book. And yeah, it was a book that I just loved. The second book was called Winter of the World. I didn't enjoy it as much as the first book. Again, it was mainly set around World War II and tells the story from all sides. It has the same characters of book 1, but again it mainly talks about their children. Obviously it's going into a new generation. Like I said, it's mainly set around World War II, and it flips sort of between what's happening in America, what's happening in England, what's happening in Russia, what's happening in Germany. And it even, I think, talked about, if I remember, a bit before the Second World War, and that was the Spanish Revolution or Civil War, whatever it was, just before the Second World War. And it was a fantastic book. Again, I think I gave that about a 4-star. And then the third book was Edge of Eternity, which I finished later on in the year. So really I started at the beginning of the year with Fall of Giants, Winter of the World. I think I read it in the middle of the year. And Edge of Eternity I finished in October. It's basically, that was more set around the Cold War. It was based more in East Germany and the Soviet Union, US, rather than the UK this time. But you had things like the Cuban Missile Strike. You had Martin Luther King was in there. The assassination of JFK was in there. You know, coming down to from really when they first put the wall that divided West Germany from East Germany right up until the end. I have to say it come to an abrupt end, and really that's what sort of put it from a 5-star down to a 4.5 star for me. It was literally just the ending. But if you are looking for a fantastic trilogy to read, I really would recommend the Century trilogy by Ken Follett. So every year, so this was goal number 4, every year I like to set myself a challenge of reading a really hard book. And this year I chose Virginia Woolf's To the Lighthouse. It was only a thin book, and I'm going to be honest, I didn't enjoy it. I didn't have really a clue what was going on. They never get to the lighthouse in this book, and I found that none of the characters were very happy. So yeah, it's not a book that I enjoyed. I can see why some people enjoy it, but it's just not really the literacy, is that the right word, literacy, that I like to read. But yeah, so that was not a very good highlight, but it was a goal that I finished. And I love reading, I love challenging myself by reading these sort of books. On to goal number 5 was to read 2 non-fiction books. Now I very rarely read non-fiction, so I wanted to actually read one of them that I set at the beginning of the year was to read Kitchen Confidential by Anthony Bourdain. I did not read this, so that is still on my TBR, but I did read 2 fantastic non-fiction books. The first one was Henry V by Dan Jones, and I have to say it was one of the best books that I read this year. The way he wrote, he got me gripped into history with Henry V. It was more about it was more like reading a story than fact, and I think that's why I enjoyed it. So yeah, I definitely do want to try some more non-fiction, definitely some more Dan Jones. I know he's done non-fiction and fiction, and there are some more of both of those genres that I do want to read from him. But yeah, if you are into history and you've never read a non-fiction, really I suggest Henry V by Dan Jones, because I really did love that book. And the second book that I really did enjoy, but I had to read it a bit slower because it was more like throwing facts at you constantly, was 1945, The Last 100 Days of World War II, and it was very interesting. It basically took you through those last 100 days with the Allies reaching Berlin, and I did learn a lot from that. So if that's anything you're interested in, I really would suggest picking up that book. So goal number 6 was to read 2 books from the New York Times Best Books of the 20th Century. I do love reading books like this from this era. I actually only managed to read one, and that was A Passage to India by E.M. Foster, and I did really enjoy this book. I did find it hard to take everything in, because obviously it's written in, I think it was early part of the 20th century. I did enjoy the book, and I would pick more books up like this again. I do again want to try and read more books that are on that list from the 20th century. And the second book, the 7th goal that I had was to read the New York Times best books from the 21st century, so books from over the last 25 years. Again, I only managed to read one, and that was The Road by Conrad McCarthy. Everyone raves about this book, and I'm going to be honest, I found it quite difficult to read. But, however, I did read the book, and then I did read the graphic novel, and in my mind, I actually understood it better by reading both. I can see why it's on that list. It's just not something that I enjoyed. I didn't like his style of writing in it. And I would pick up another one of his books, but it would take me a lot to pick up another one of his books. Maybe I'll try another one this year, who knows. So goal number, what are we on? Number 8 was to read one book from the top 10 favourite genres. So this was romance, fantasy, science fiction, paranormal, mystery, horror, thriller and suspense, action and adventure, and historical fiction. Oh, and contemporary fiction. I did have to work out what contemporary fiction was, but yeah, I enjoyed doing this one actually because it made me read out of my comfort zone. I probably would have never picked up a science fiction book if it hadn't been for doing this, and it was I did enjoy it. I read Andy Weir's what was it called? Project Hail Mary. I've not long finished that actually, and it was a very good book, but again, it wouldn't have been a book that I would have normally picked up. I think I gave it about 4 stars, and I probably would read another one of his books in the future, and it has probably got me into sci-fi a little bit. So yeah, that was a good start for that one. The best book that I actually read from doing this goal was it was called How to Kill My Family by Bella McKee, and I loved the book. I loved the storyline, I loved how she wrote it, how it was almost as if the girl was writing a diary. I just found it funny and witty and just loved it from start to finish. It was a book that I just couldn't put down, and again, it probably would have been a book that I wouldn't have picked up if it wouldn't been for trying to complete one of these reading goals. And I have to say, I picked up a standalone fantasy book which everyone raves about. So I picked up The Sword of Kaigan, and I know you're all going to come up at me in the comments, oh, it's an amazing book. So this book's by M.L. Wang, and it didn't live up to the hype. I loved the first half of the book and the action in the book, but the second half of the book I found just went downhill for me. It's just something that I didn't enjoy. I would try and pick up another one of her books. I think she released one this year. I can't remember what it's called. I think it's Blood Over Bright Haven or something like that. I would try and read another one of her books just to see if that was just a one-off. But yeah, it didn't live up to the hype for me, guys. So yeah, it's not something that I would recommend, but hey, you know, reading is subjective to you personally. So yeah, it's just something I did not get on with. Then I wanted to go on and finish a few series. Dungeon Crawler Kyle is a 7-book series. I read the first book at the end of 2024 and absolutely loved it, and I managed to read 2 more books in the series. The second one did take a little bit of a dive for me, but the third one picked it back up, and I absolutely loved it, especially with the trains. I just found it really interesting. It made me want to read more and more. Like I said, there is 7 more books that I do need to read before, I think it's March, that the 8th book in the series comes out. So it is a series that I will be picking up at the beginning of this year, and hopefully finishing all 7 in that series. It's basically a lit RPG. It's like a computer game where the characters progress and get stronger and yeah, go up a level in the game, and it's just something I've never read before, but something that I really love. And I love the covers of the books. They're so bright, and in my mind they just like stand out to me, and that's probably why I picked it up in the first place. Okay, so one of the second series I wanted to finish was the Fourth Wing series. So I picked up Iron Flame, and I'm going to be honest, I did not enjoy it. It was more about the love story between the two main characters rather than the action like there was in the first book. I think I even put out there on my Instagram or something about, does this book get any better? And you guys come back with me and said carry on reading, and I'm glad I did, because the ending did end quite well. And then I went on to Onyx Storm, which was released, I believe, at the beginning of this year. Really enjoyed that book, so I'm looking to see how this book continues when she brings the next one out. I'm not sure when it is. And then I decided that I wanted to finish reading the Dune series. So again, I read Dune in 2024, and I only managed to read 2 out of the 6. I do have the 4th one, you know, on my TBR actually at the minute. But yeah, again, I didn't enjoy the 2nd book, but the 3rd book I really did enjoy Children of Dune, and it made me want to carry on going into the 4th one. I have heard that the 4th one concludes with the Atreides family, and then the 5th and the 6th goes on to something else, and that they're not the best books, but I need to find out for myself. And then goal number 9 was to read the Bernard Cornwell Saxon series, so The Last Kingdom. I was a massive fan of the Netflix program. It concludes 13 books, and yes, I did really enjoy the 2 books that I have read so far. So I've read The Last Kingdom and The Pale Horse, but there was just so much more out there that I wanted to read that they never got to the top of my TBR. It is a series that I have been enjoying and that I will continue to read, just very gradually. But yeah, they were, you know, there was more in the books obviously than the series, there always is, and it's a series, like I said, I will continue. It's just not top of my TBR at the minute. Goal number 10 was to read 2 books published in 2025, which I completed. So I read Sunrise of the Reaping by Suzanne Collins, which basically talks about Hamish's story in the Hunger Games. And I have to say, out of all 5 books, the Hamish's story and Cornelius Snow's story I actually preferred than the first original trilogy. I did reread the trilogy, and I did read A Song of Snakes and Ballads, I believe it was, before I read this one, hence why I went down a rabbit hole. And you know, it was not something that I intended to do, it's just I wanted to catch up with everything. But yeah, so that was the first book that I read that was published in 2025, and the second book was The Secrets of Secrets by Dan Brown. I am a massive Dan Brown fan. If you click up here, you'll probably be able to go and see the video of the books that I've already ranked of his. With this book, I did find that I enjoyed it. It's not as good as Da Vinci Code and Angels and Demons. I just feel like the puzzles that he's solving is not as complex and not as good as those 2 stories. But it was a very, very good read. It's set in Prague, and he's basically running all over Prague, basically to save the woman he loves. But it is definitely a book I suggest that you pick up. Goal number 11, I failed, and that was to read the Booker Prize winner of 2025. I believe the book was Flesh by David, cannot pronounce his name. I just didn't get around to reading it. It was just, again, wasn't a priority for me. Goal number 12 was to read 2 other Booker Prize winners. I did read one, and that was Orbit, which was last year's Booker Prize winner by Samantha Harvey. And it was basically 24 hours in orbit with, I believe, 6 astronauts, and you see from their different perspective, and basically goes through their day. Was a very good book, very small, which I liked. I can see why it won the Booker Prize. Goal 13. This one again I did not complete, was to read 12 books from different countries from around the world. I got 2 done out of the 12. It just was not a goal that I was enjoying. Again, there were books that wasn't at the top of my priority list. The books that I did enjoy, I think I read a Japanese writer I did really enjoy that book. I think I gave it a 3-star, but it's just, again, it was not something that was at the top of my TBR. So that was all of my goals for 2025. Out of the 14, I only complete 6. And I believe that I just set myself too many goals, and you know, with them I went down a rabbit hole of like the Suzanne Collins. I went down that rabbit hole and you know, there were just other books that come up through the year that I wanted to read. So my standout books, let's talk about those of the year. I have 2 standout books which I have already spoken about, so I will only briefly touch on them, and that is Henry V by Dan Jones, was a 5-star, and The Fall of Giants by Ken Follett, which was a 5-star. I do have 2 honorary mentions though that were just not quite 5-star, and one again I've already talked about, and that was How to Kill My Family, and the 4th was The 7 Sisters by Lucinda Riley. This was given to me by my hairdresser, and boy, I enjoyed it so much. It was such a good book. It basically talks about 7 sisters that have been adopted by a rich man, all from different countries. He dies, and he sort of left them clues to find out who they were, where they've come from. The first book starts with the oldest sister, and she goes and finds her heritage in Brazil. So the book is mainly set around Rio de Janeiro, but it flicks between her and going back to her, I think it was her grandmother actually talks about in this. It's a fantastic book. Again, it's a series that I want to continue. I have only read the 1 book, and hopefully I will pick up the 2nd book at some point in 2026. So let's talk, we all know what my least favourite book is going to be, and that was The Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf. So yeah, let me know how you got on in 2025. Next week I'm going to do a video about what my goals for 2026 are. If you've enjoyed this video, please hit that subscribe button. It is free to do, and don't forget to like this video. You'll be helping me out. If you want to see more from me, tune in next week.